What if the most extraordinary voices in the world were not found in grand theaters or glittering arenas, but hidden in the narrow alleys of forgotten towns? Philippines' life had always been heavy with struggle. The air smelled of salt water and smoke from charcoal stoves. Wooden houses leaned against each other as though sharing the weight of poverty. In one of these fragile homes lived Miguel, a 14-year-old boy with dark, searching eyes and a spirit carved by hardship. His mother Rosa rose before the sun each day, selling vegetables and rice on the roadside. She carried hope in her heart but exhaustion in her bones. Miguel's father had once been a dreamer, a man who believed that music could lift people out of despair. But illness had claimed him early, leaving behind only an old, broken guitar and a promise whispered to his son: never stop singing. Miguel had no music lessons, no polished training. His classroom was the street corner, his audience the stray dogs and the neighbors who paused to listen before hurrying back to their own struggles. His voice was raw, unshaped, but there was something in it that touched hearts, something honest, something that could not be taught. When the night fell and lamps flickered weakly across the town, Miguel would sit on the wooden steps outside his home. He sang not to impress, but to survive. Each song was a prayer, each note a cry for something more. Poverty had stripped him of toys, new clothes, even the comfort of a complete family, but it had not stolen his gift. No one in that quiet town could have imagined that this same boy would one day stand on the grandest stage in the world with lights blazing, cameras rolling, and the eyes of millions fixed upon him. Yet fate has a strange way of carrying even the smallest voices to places they never thought they'd reach. And so begins the story of the boy whose song crossed oceans, touched hearts, and turned tears into golden confetti. The invitation came like a whisper of destiny. A local charity worker who had heard Miguel sing on the streets recorded him and sent the video across the world. Weeks later, an email arrived, an opportunity so unreal that Rosa could hardly believe it. America's Got Talent. The very words felt heavier than gold. For Miguel, stepping beyond his small town was already a miracle. He had never traveled far from the sea, never seen the endless highways that stretched beyond their island. And now, he was about to cross an ocean. At the airport, Miguel clutched his guitar, the same worn instrument his father once held, its wood chipped, its strings tired but faithful. His eyes darted around in wonder. The ceiling seemed to touch the sky. Screens flashed with strange letters, and voices around him spoke in languages he didn't understand. To him, it all felt like stepping into another universe. On the plane, he pressed his face against the small oval window. Beneath him, the land and sea melted into clouds. He had never imagined the world could look so vast, so endless. Fear trembled in his chest, but beside him sat Rosa, her hand resting firmly on his. She whispered no words, but her touch reminded him, "You are not alone." Hours turned into days of travel. When they finally arrived in America, the city lights blinded him. Towering buildings rose like giants, cars rushed like streams of fire, and neon signs glowed brighter than stars. Miguel felt small, almost invisible in this enormous world. Yet inside, he carried something greater than all the skyscrapers combined: his voice, his father's dream, his mother's faith. Each night in the unfamiliar hotel room, he sat by the window and hummed quietly. He thought of his village, the children chasing after broken kites, the neighbors who would gather when he sang. He wondered if his voice, so fragile back home, could survive here. But destiny does not choose the powerful or the privileged. It chooses the pure of heart. And as Miguel closed his eyes, guitar resting by his side, he didn't see himself as a poor boy anymore. He saw himself as a storyteller about to tell his story through song on the grandest stage of all. The day of the audition arrived like a storm. The theater was alive with energy, buzzing with voices, lights, and dreams colliding in one place. Contestants waited backstage, some pacing nervously, others rehearsing lines or melodies. But Miguel sat quietly in the corner, his small hands gripping the neck of his father's guitar, as though it were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away. For the first time, he was surrounded by cameras, stagehands, and people chasing the same dream. He wore a shirt borrowed from a neighbor in his village, slightly oversized, and shoes that pinched his toes because they were not his size. Around him, others sparkled in sequins, polished and perfect. He looked down at himself and wondered if he belonged here. Then, the curtain shifted and the stage manager called his name. Miguel's legs felt heavy, but he moved forward. As he stepped into the blinding lights, his world expanded into something surreal. The auditorium stretched endlessly, filled with thousands of faces. Cameras hovered, capturing every breath, every heartbeat. The judges sat in front like distant kings. Simon Cowell with his piercing gaze, Sofia Vergara's warm smile, Heidi Klum's elegance, and Howie Mandel leaning curiously forward. Miguel's throat tightened. The microphone towered in front of him, the silence of the room pressing down like a weight. For a heartbeat, doubt screamed inside him. What if I fail? What if my voice isn't enough? And then, he remembered his father's words, remembered the nights under the streetlight, remembered Rosa's hands that had sacrificed everything. He closed his eyes, touched the strings, and let the first notes escape. The sound of Hotel California floated into the air. But it wasn't just a song, it was Miguel's soul unraveling. His voice carried the ache of hunger, the sting of loss, the hope of a boy who had nothing but dared to dream everything. Each lyric trembled with honesty, each chord rang with truth. The crowd, at first skeptical, leaned in. The murmur of disbelief softened into silence. His voice, though young, carried a depth that felt older than his years. He didn't just sing the song, he transformed it. The familiar melody became a bridge between his world and theirs, between poverty and possibility. Simon's face shifted. The man known for his sharp judgments blinked, his eyes glassy, as though the boy's voice had unlocked a memory, long buried. Around the theater, people rose slowly, unable to resist the pull of something greater than entertainment. It was no longer a performance, it was a confession, a prayer, a cry wrapped in music. Miguel's small frame stood firm, his voice soaring higher, breaking through every wall of doubt. And when the final note lingered in the air, heavy with emotion, the room erupted. The audience leaped to their feet, clapping, shouting, cheering. Miguel opened his eyes, stunned by the sound of thunder that greeted him. But amidst the chaos, one moment froze in time. Simon Cowell wiping a tear from his cheek. The boy from the streets of Bataan had done the unthinkable. He had reached the heart of the man who seemed unreachable. The last note of Hotel California hung in the air like a prayer, fragile yet unshakable. For a heartbeat, silence filled the vast auditorium, as if the world itself paused to catch its breath. Miguel stood frozen under the spotlight, clutching his guitar, too afraid to look up. He had given everything, his fear, his pain, his love, through that song. Then, the silence shattered. The audience erupted into thunderous applause. People stood on their feet, clapping, shouting, their faces lit with tears and awe. Miguel blinked in disbelief, his chest rising and falling, his small frame trembling. He had never seen such a sea of strangers moved by his voice. But it wasn't the cheers that broke him, it was the sight of Simon Cowell. The man known for his unshakable composure leaned forward, his hand covering his face for a brief moment. And when he looked up, his eyes glistened with tears. Miguel's voice had pierced even the toughest armor. And then, it happened. Simon reached across the table and slammed his palm down on the golden buzzer. In an instant, the stage transformed. A burst of golden light filled the air. Confetti rained from above, falling like blessings from heaven. Miguel's eyes widened as glittering pieces of gold touched his hair, his shoulders, his guitar. He looked around in awe, unable to believe that this miracle was real. From the side of the stage, Rosa ran forward, her hands trembling as she climbed onto the platform. She wrapped her arms around her son, both of them sobbing openly. For years, she had carried sacks of vegetables heavier than her own body, worked endless hours just to keep him alive, and now she was holding the boy who had turned their suffering into music, standing in front of the whole world. The crowd's cheers grew louder, but Miguel only heard the sound of his mother's tears against his shoulder. In that moment, he was not just a contestant on a stage, he was a son who had fulfilled his father's dream, a boy who had taken the weight of poverty and turned it into a golden rain. For Miguel, the confetti was not paper. It was the promise of a new life.